A heartbroken waitress, struggling to feed her son, performs a simple act of kindness for a mysterious man in a diner, unaware he is the reclusive billionaire who owns the entire city block. "Will there be anything else, ma'am?" The polite question splintered the heavy silence that had settled around Alara's small table for two. The flickering light from the single candle flame danced across the waitress's weary face, illuminating a professional sympathy that did little to soothe the biting cold of humiliation blooming in Alara's chest. She managed a small, tight smile, her lips feeling brittle and unfamiliar. "No, thank you. I'm just waiting." The lie felt like ash in her mouth. She was no longer waiting. She was enduring. The clock on the far wall, an ornate monstrosity of polished brass and dark wood, showed it was nearly 9 o'clock, a full hour after her blind date was supposed to arrive. The initial flutter of nervous hope had long since died, replaced by a hollow ache that resonated with the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. He was not coming. The rain hammered down on the glass awning outside the bistro, a relentless, pounding rhythm that mirrored the frantic thudding of her own heart. Each drop that slid down the pane of glass beside her booth felt like a tear for a life she couldn't seem to grasp, a future that remained stubbornly out of reach. She smoothed down the fabric of her dress for the 10th time, a simple navy blue garment she'd bought from a second-hand store 3 years ago, its fabric worn thin at the elbows and its color faded from countless washes. It was the nicest thing she owned, and tonight, it felt like a costume for a role she had failed to secure. The soft hush of the restaurant, with its clinking silverware and murmured conversations, felt like a judgment. Every quiet chuckle from a nearby table seemed to be directed at her, the lonely woman at the table set for two. She was a cliché. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders. She had only agreed to this date, set up by her well-meaning but clueless friend, for one simple, desperate reason: a free meal. The thought made her wince. Her last paycheck from the diner where she worked had been short, her tips barely enough to cover the bus fare, and the food in her pantry had dwindled to a can of beans and a half-empty box of crackers. Her son, 7-year-old Leo, was staying with a neighbor for the night, a kindness she could barely afford to repay. He was the sun in her sky, the steady beat of her heart, and the thought of his gentle, trusting face was the only thing that kept the despair from swallowing her whole. She had wanted, just for one night, to eat a meal she hadn't cooked from scraps, to sit in a place with cloth napkins and not worry about the bill. The hope had been a fragile, flickering thing. Now it was extinguished. She reached for her worn purse, the pleather cracked and peeling at the corners, preparing to face the biting cold of the November night and the long walk home. She would have to apologize to the waitress, explain that her date was a no-show, and endure that final, pitying glance. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled out the thin wallet. She had exactly $7 to her name, money she had earmarked for Leo's school trip permission slip. She would have to use it for the bus. Her chest tightened. It was all just too much. The constant struggle, the endless worry, the profound, soul-crushing loneliness. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down her pale cheek. She brushed it away angrily. She would not cry here. She would not give them the satisfaction. Dignity was all she had left. It was in that moment of quiet resolve, as she prepared to stand and leave, that the heavy oak door of the restaurant swung open, letting in a gust of wind that made the candle on her table gutter wildly. Two small figures, identical in their bright yellow raincoats and matching red boots, stood framed in the doorway, their faces small and serious as they scanned the room. They were twins, little girls no older than 5, with wide, curious eyes the color of warm honey and dark curls peeking out from under their hoods. They looked impossibly small and lost in the cavernous, amber-hued dining room. For a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. They took a few hesitant steps inside, hand in hand, their red boots squeaking softly on the polished marble floor. Their gaze swept past the other tables, past the couples and families, before finally landing, with unerring childish certainty, on Alara. They started walking towards her. Alara froze. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Were they lost? Where were their parents? The other patrons were beginning to murmur, Their curiosity piqued. The two girls stopped directly in front of her table, their expressions a mixture of shyness and solemn duty. One of them, braver than her sister, took a small step forward. Her voice was a soft, clear bell in the suddenly silent room. "My daddy's sorry he's late." The silence deepened. The world seemed to shrink to the space between Alara and these two small, rain-splattered messengers. The statement was so simple, so absurd, yet delivered with such sincerity that it knocked the air from her lungs. This was her date? A man who sent his two small children into a restaurant alone to make his apologies? A wave of confusion, followed by a strange, protective warmth, washed over her. These were just children. They looked nervous and cold. Her own disappointment, her own humiliation, vanished in an instant, replaced by a singular, urgent focus. The little girl who had spoken nudged her sister, who was hiding slightly behind her. "He had to make a very important phone call," the second girl added, her voice a little quieter, a little more tremulous. "He said to tell you he's almost here." Alara's heart, which had felt like a cold, heavy stone in her chest just moments before, gave a painful lurch. She looked from one small, earnest face to the other. Their raincoats were dripping onto the floor, and their cheeks were pink from the cold. They were clutching matching worn, stuffed rabbits, their fabric threadbare from years of love. Her own hardship paled in comparison to the sight of these two children, sent on such a strange and adult errand. All she saw was their vulnerability. She slid out of the booth, her movements gentle so as not to startle them. "It's all right," she said, her voice softer than she'd intended. "Thank you for telling me. You must be very cold. Why don't you come sit down for a minute while we wait?" The relief on their faces was immediate and profound. The braver twin nodded vigorously, pulling her sister towards the empty side of the booth. They clambered onto the plush velvet seat, their little legs dangling far above the floor. They placed their wet rabbits carefully on the table beside the flickering candle. "I'm Lily," the first girl said, pointing to herself. "And this is Rose." Rose gave a shy little wave. Alara's heart clenched. They were beautiful, innocent. She slid back into her own seat, the table no longer feeling so large and empty. A moment of internal hesitation seized her. She had $7. $7 that belonged to Leo. But looking at their shivering forms and their wide, trusting eyes, she knew she couldn't just let them sit there. Her own hunger was a distant echo. Their need was immediate. Her inherent goodness, the part of her that always put others first, took over. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" she asked, the words leaving her lips before she could second-guess them. "It's very good here. It will warm you right up." Their eyes lit up in unison. A shared, seismic shift from solemnity to pure, childish delight. "Yes, please," they chorused. The selfless act was performed with a simple nod to the waitress, who had been watching the scene unfold with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The personal cost was the loss of Leo's trip money, a problem for tomorrow, but the reward was the two brilliant, sincere smiles she received in return. This was a currency she understood far better than money. As they waited, Lily, the more talkative of the two, began to chatter. She told Alara about their day, about a big dog they saw in the park, about how Rose had lost a red crayon and been very sad about it. Alara listened, truly listened, asking questions and laughing at their stories. She felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the heated restaurant. It was the warmth of connection, a feeling she hadn't realized she was so starved for. The hot chocolates arrived in tall glasses with whipped cream and chocolate shavings, looking like a child's dream. The girls gasped, their eyes wide with awe. They sipped the sweet, warm liquid with careful concentration, their earlier nervousness completely gone, replaced by a comfortable familiarity. They treated Alara as if they had known her forever. She watched them, a tender, unspoken ache in her heart. She thought of Leo, of his easy laughter and tight hugs. These girls deserved a father who didn't leave them standing in the rain. A flicker of anger towards the still absent man ignited within her, but she pushed it down. It wasn't her place. Just as Rose was meticulously licking the last of the whipped cream from her spoon, the restaurant door opened again. This time it was a man. He stood there for a moment, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, his gaze sweeping the room with a frantic energy. He was tall, dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit that was now soaked and wrinkled from the pounding rain. His dark hair was disheveled, plastered to his forehead, and his face was pale, almost gaunt, etched with lines of exhaustion and something else, a deep, haunted sorrow. His eyes, a startlingly intense shade of gray, found his daughter's. Relief washed over his features, so potent it was almost painful to watch. He strode towards the table, his long legs covering the distance in a few quick strides. He didn't even seem to notice Alara at first. His entire world had narrowed to the two small figures in her booth. "Lily. Rose," he said, his voice a low, rough baritone, thick with emotion. "I told you to wait by the door." The girls scrambled out of the booth and ran to him, wrapping their arms around his legs. He crouched down, pulling them into a fierce, desperate hug, burying his face in their damp hair. He held them for a long moment, his eyes squeezed shut, as if he were holding on to his only anchor in a storm. Alara watched the raw, private moment, feeling like an intruder. It was clear this man was not just late. He was shattered. When he finally straightened up, his gaze fell on Alara. His gray eyes were hollow, filled with a profound weariness that seemed to go bone deep. He looked at her, then at the two empty hot chocolate glasses on the table, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He began, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat. "I apologize. My meeting, it ran late." There was an emergency. His explanation was clipped, impersonal. Lily tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, this is the nice lady. She bought us hot chocolate because we were cold." The man's eyes met Alara's again. For the first time, he seemed to truly see her. He saw her worn dress, her kind, patient face, the gentle worry in her eyes. A strange, unreadable emotion flickered in his gaze. It was a moment of stunned silence, a profound, life-altering impact that he would later recognize as the first crack of light in his long, dark night. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would change everything. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, black wallet. He extracted a crisp $100 bill and placed it on the table. The gesture was swift, transactional. "For the drinks," he said, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. "And for your trouble." The dismissive finality of his words was like a slap. Alara flinched. The brief, almost silent exchange felt like a chasm opening between them. "That's not necessary," she said quietly, pushing the bill back towards him. It was only a few dollars, but he was already turning away, gathering his daughters. "Come on, girls. We have to go." He herded them towards the door without another word, without a backward glance. The door clicked softly shut behind them, leaving Alara alone once more at the table for two, the untouched $100 bill a stark, insulting testament to the encounter. She was gone. The warmth, the laughter, the brief, beautiful connection. It had all vanished. Total silence. The walk home was a blur of biting wind and slick, dark pavement. The relentless hammering of the rain had softened to a cold, persistent drizzle that soaked through her thin coat, chilling her to the bone. She hadn't taken the bus. She couldn't bring herself to use the money the man had left. Felt wrong, like payment for a service she hadn't offered. It felt like charity, and her pride, already bruised and threadbare, couldn't bear it. So she walked, her cheap flats splashing through puddles, the $7 for Leo's trip still tucked safely in her wallet. The encounter in the restaurant replayed in her mind, a confusing loop of emotions. The sweetness of the girls, their innocent trust, was a stark contrast to the cold, distant grief of their father. He was a man drowning in a private sea of pain, and she had been a piece of driftwood he had barely noticed. The brief hope that had flickered to life in the presence of the children now felt foolish. She was back where she started. Alone, poor, and facing another mountain of worries in the morning. When she finally reached her small apartment building, its brick facade stained and crumbling. She felt a weariness so profound it was a physical ache in her bones. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs, each step a monumental effort. The hallway was dimly lit, smelling of dust and damp. As she approached her door, number 3B, she noticed something odd. Taped to the wood was a plain white envelope. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic, fearful rhythm. An eviction notice. It had to be. She was 2 months behind on rent, and her landlord, a gruff, impatient man, had made it clear his patience was at an end. Her hand trembled as she pulled the envelope from the door. It was crisp, heavy, and sealed with wax, bearing no name or return address. With a sense of dread, she tore it open. Inside was not a legal notice, but a receipt from her landlord's office. It was marked in bold, red letters, paid in full. Beneath it, a second receipt showed her rent had been paid in advance for the next 6 months. Alara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She stared at the receipt, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. It was impossible. A mistake. She checked the apartment number, her name. It was all correct. Who would do this? Why? There was no note, no explanation, just the cold, hard fact of the paid receipt. A wave of disbelief, so strong it made her dizzy, washed over her. She leaned against the wall for support, her legs suddenly weak. A sob caught in her throat, a mixture of shock, confusion, and overwhelming, cathartic relief. The crushing weight of the overdue rent, a burden she carried with her every single day, had been lifted. Just like that, she slid down the wall to sit on the worn carpet of the hallway, the receipt clutched in her hand like a sacred text. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It felt like a miracle, a bizarre, inexplicable act of grace in a life that had felt bereft of it. She sat there for a long time, in the dim, quiet hallway, as the shock slowly gave way to a fragile, burgeoning sense of hope. The next few days passed in a dreamlike state. The miracle of the rent was followed by another. A large box appeared on her doorstep 2 days later, filled to the brim with groceries. Not just staples like pasta and rice, but fresh fruit, vegetables, cheese, and even a small, decadent chocolate cake. There was also a brand new pair of sturdy, waterproof boots for her, and a beautiful, illustrated book of fairy tales for Leo. Again, there was no note. Alara felt a growing sense of unease mixed with her gratitude. She was being watched, cared for by a secret, anonymous benefactor. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. She asked her neighbors, her landlord, her one friend, but no one knew anything. The gifts were a complete mystery, dropped into her life like stones into a still pond, the ripples expanding outward, changing everything. The constant, grinding anxiety that had been her companion for so long began to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of wonder. Then came the third intervention. A thick, cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail, bearing the ornate logo of a company she had only ever heard of in whispers, Sterling Enterprises. It was the largest, most powerful corporation in the city, a behemoth of finance and technology housed in a gleaming skyscraper that scraped the clouds. The letter, printed on heavy, crisp cardstock, was an offer for an interview. Not just any interview, but for the position of executive assistant to a senior vice president. The listed salary was more than she had ever dared to dream of, enough to not just get by, but to build a life. A real, stable life for her and Leo. It felt like a prank, a cruel joke. She hadn't applied for this job. She hadn't applied for any job at Sterling Enterprises. Her resume, with its spotty work history and diner waitress experience, would have been laughed out of their mailroom. Yet, here was the letter, formal and official, with a specific date and time for her to appear. Someone had submitted her name. Someone had pulled strings she didn't know existed. Someone was orchestrating her salvation. A single name echoed in the back of her mind. A fleeting, impossible thought. The haunted man from the restaurant. Couldn't be. He had barely looked at her. He had dismissed her with a $100 bill. And yet, who else could it be? The mystery was becoming a tangible presence in her life. A shadow she couldn't quite see but whose influence was undeniable. She folded the letter, her hands steady for the first time in years. She would go to the interview. She had to know. The lobby of the Sterling Enterprises Tower was a cavernous cathedral of polished marble and gleaming steel. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a space so vast and sterile it felt like another world. Men and women in impeccable suits moved with a quiet, commanding purpose, their footsteps echoing softly in the cavernous space. Alara felt small and out of place in her second-hand navy dress, the same one she had worn on that fateful night. It was still the nicest thing she owned. She clutched her worn purse to her chest like a shield, her heart thudding a nervous, unsteady rhythm against her ribs. She gave her name to the receptionist, a cool, elegant woman behind a massive slab of white marble, and was told to take a seat. The wait was agonizing. With every passing minute, her conviction that this was all a terrible mistake grew stronger. She was an imposter in this world of wealth and power. "Ms. Vance," a voice cut through her anxious thoughts. A young man in a crisp suit was standing before her. "Mr. Sterling will see you now, Mr. Sterling." The name sent a jolt through her. She had assumed she would be meeting a vice president, as the letter had stated. The founder and CEO of the entire corporation was a reclusive, almost mythical figure named Alistair Sterling. No one ever saw him. He hadn't been photographed in years, not since the tragic death of his wife. Alara's blood ran cold. It was a coincidence. It had to be. She followed the young man through a labyrinth of quiet, carpeted hallways to a set of enormous, dark wood doors. He opened one and gestured for her to enter. "He's waiting for you." She stepped inside. The office was larger than her entire apartment, with one wall made entirely of glass, offering a breathtaking, panoramic view of the city below. A massive mahogany desk sat in the center of the room, stark and empty save for a single, framed photograph. And standing by the window, his back to her, was a tall figure in a dark, perfectly tailored suit. He turned around slowly. It was him, the man from the restaurant, but he was transformed. The haunted, disheveled man from that rainy night was gone. In his place stood a commanding, powerful figure. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His jaw was clean-shaven, and the exhaustion in his eyes had been replaced by a sharp, piercing intelligence. The deep, lingering sorrow was still there, a shadow in the depths of his intense gray eyes, but it was now contained, controlled. He was Alistair Sterling, the reclusive billionaire, the father of the twins. Alara froze, her breath catching in her throat. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. "You," she whispered, the single word a breath of pure shock. He gave a small, sad smile. "Me," he confirmed, his voice the same low baritone, but now steady and clear. "Please, sit down." Alara, he knew her name. Of course he knew her name. He had paid her rent. He had sent her groceries. He had arranged this impossible interview. The quiet observation of his secret interventions had led to this. The grand revelation. She sank into one of the plush leather chairs opposite his desk, her mind reeling. He sat down behind the desk, his movements calm and deliberate. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. He was the one who broke it. "My daughters," he began, his gaze softening as he glanced at the photograph on his desk. A beautiful woman with the same honey-colored eyes as the twins. "They wouldn't stop talking about you. The nice lady who gave them hot chocolate and wasn't mad that their daddy was late." He looked back at Alara, his expression raw and vulnerable. "That night, I was not myself. It was the anniversary of my wife's death. I was coming from the cemetery. I lost track of time. I was lost. When I saw them sitting with you, safe and warm and smiling. It was the first time I had seen them truly smile in a year." A sob caught in his throat, and he paused, composing himself. This was the beginning of the confession. He told her everything. He spoke of his wife, Amelia, the love of his life, taken by a sudden illness 3 years prior. He described the profound, suffocating grief that had followed, how he had thrown himself into his work, building an empire but neglecting his own heart and, he feared, his own children. He had become a ghost in his own life, a hollow man going through the motions. "I saw the way you looked at them," he said, his voice thick with emotion, with such genuine, selfless kindness. "You had been stood up, left waiting for an hour, yet you spent what I later learned was your last few dollars on my children without a second thought. In a world that has become so transactional, so cold, your actions were profound." It woke something up in me. He explained how he had a security guard follow her home that night to make sure she was safe, and how he had then used his resources to learn about her situation, about her unjust firing from the diner for taking a sick day to care for Leo, about her struggle to find work, about her mounting debts. "I wanted to help," he said simply. "I had to help. You showed me a purity, a goodness I thought no longer existed. You gave me hope." He listened then as she, in turn, told him her story. She spoke of Leo, of her dreams for his future, of the quiet desperation that had become her daily existence. She spoke of her own loss, a mother she had adored, taken by the same cruel illness that had claimed his wife. As she spoke, he listened with an unwavering, steady intensity that made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in a very long time. He didn't offer empty platitudes or pity. He just listened, his gray eyes filled with a deep, shared understanding. A bond was being forged between them, a fragile connection built on the foundations of shared grief and mutual respect. The cavernous, intimidating office began to feel like a sanctuary, a quiet, safe space where two broken people could show each other their scars. When she finished, he didn't speak for a moment. He simply rose, walked over to a small, concealed kitchenette, and made her a cup of tea, his movements efficient and comforting. He placed the warm mug in her hands, his fingers brushing against hers for a fleeting second. The gentle, non-romantic physical contact was a silent promise of safety, of security. He offered her the job, not as an assistant to a vice president, but as the manager of his new charitable foundation, a role that would utilize her compassion and organizational skills, with a salary that would change her life forever. Disbelief warred with a hope so fierce it was painful. She accepted. The Sterling Foundation's annual charity gala was the most anticipated event on the city's social calendar, a glittering affair held in the grand ballroom of a stately, historic hotel. Alara stood beside Alistair near the soaring arched windows, looking out at the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. She felt like a character in a fairy tale, dressed in a simple but elegant emerald green gown Alistair had insisted on buying for her. In the 2 months since she had started her new job, her life had transformed. She had a beautiful new apartment, Leo was enrolled in a wonderful school, and the constant hum of anxiety had been replaced by a quiet confidence. More importantly, she and Alistair had grown closer. Their shared grief had blossomed into a deep friendship, a tender, unspoken affection that hovered between them, charged with possibility. He was a kind, gentle man beneath his commanding corporate exterior, a devoted father whose laughter she was slowly, carefully coaxing back into the world. He made her feel safe. He made her feel hopeful. As she was smiling at something he said, a sharp, familiar voice cut through the air. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in." Alara froze. She turned to see a woman with a severe haircut and a cruel, thin-lipped smile approaching them. It was Mrs. Gable, the former restaurant manager who had fired her, her face a mask of smug superiority. She looked Alara up and down, her eyes filled with disdain, taking in the elegant dress and the powerful man at her side. The public humiliation was about to begin. "I must say, Alara, I'm surprised to see you here," Mrs. Gable sneered, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I thought you'd be scrubbing floors somewhere. Or did you finally find a wealthy man to latch onto? You always were good at playing the victim." The words were like stones, sharp and bruising. Alara remained dignified, her back straight, but a pale flush crept up her neck. She was visibly overwhelmed, the old feelings of shame and inadequacy rushing back. Before she could respond, Alistair stepped forward slightly, placing himself between Alara and her tormentor. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His calm but powerful presence was enough to make Mrs. Gable falter. He made his dramatic entrance into the conversation. "Mrs. Gable, is it?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous purr. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Alistair Sterling." Mrs. Gable's jaw dropped. The color drained from her face as she recognized the city's most powerful man. Alistair's gray eyes were like chips of ice. He began his powerful monologue, his voice carrying in the sudden hush that had fallen over their small section of the ballroom. "I'm familiar with your work, both at the restaurant you so poorly manage and with your treatment of your employees. Specifically, your treatment of Ms. Vance, whom you illegally terminated for taking an approved sick day to care for her child." The crowd around them grew, drawn by the drama. Mrs. Gable stammered, speechless. "You see, Alara is not just my guest tonight," Alistair continued, his voice resonating with cold fury. "She is the executive director of my foundation. She is one of the most compassionate, resilient, and honorable people I have ever had the privilege of knowing. You saw her as a disposable worker. I see her as an invaluable leader." He took a small step closer to the now trembling woman. "And as for the restaurant you manage, a fun fact for you. As of yesterday afternoon, I own the parent company that holds its lease. Your position, along with your entire regional management team, is being rendered redundant as we restructure. You are fired." The words hung in the air, a public execution delivered with surgical precision. Mrs. Gable stared at him, her face a mask of shattered disbelief. He had completely reversed the power dynamic. He had defended Alara's character and publicly offered her status, leaving her antagonist utterly destroyed. He then turned his back on the woman, dismissing her as if she were nothing, and faced Alara, his eyes now soft and full of a profound, undeniable emotion. "Alara," he said, his voice now gentle, for her ears only. "Are you all right?" She could only nod, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. In that moment, he was not just her boss or her benefactor. He was her savior. He led her away from the stunned crowd, through a set of French doors and onto a quiet, moonlit balcony overlooking the city lights. The cool night air was a welcome relief. The resolution of the conflict left a quiet space for romantic fulfillment. They stood in silence for a moment, the distant sounds of the gala a faint murmur behind them. Alara finally found her voice. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No one has ever stood up for me like that before." Alistair turned to face her, taking her hands in his. His touch was warm and steady. "I would do it again, 1,000 times," he said, his voice raw with sincerity. "Alara, these past 2 months, working with you, getting to know you and Leo, it has been like watching the sun rise after a long, dark night. You and your son have brought light and laughter back into my home, back into my life." He raised one hand to gently cup her cheek, his thumb stroking away a single tear that had escaped. "What I'm trying to say," he faltered, the powerful CEO suddenly as nervous as a schoolboy, "is that my admiration for you has grown into something much deeper, something I haven't allowed myself to feel in a very long time." His confession hung in the sacred silence between them. He was offering her not just his protection, but his heart. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Alara Vance, her heart, which had been battered and bruised for so long, felt as if it might burst with a joy so pure and overwhelming it was almost painful. She leaned into his touch, her own feelings for him, which she had kept carefully hidden, rising to the surface. "I think," she whispered back, a radiant smile finally breaking through her tears, "I'm falling in love with you, too." Alistair Sterling. He closed the small distance between them and kissed her. A tender, gentle kiss filled with all the unspoken words, all the shared grief, and all the bright, beautiful hope for a future they would now build together. 1 year later, the golden glow of the late afternoon sun streamed through the large bay window of a stately, comfortable home, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The sound of children's laughter echoed from the lush green garden outside, a joyous, carefree sound that filled every corner of the house with warmth. Alara sat on a plush sofa in the living room, a half-finished cup of tea on the table beside her. a book lying open but unread in her lap. She was watching Alistair through the window as he pushed Lily and Rose on the swings, their little legs kicking with delight. Her own son, Leo, was chasing a soccer ball across the lawn with them, his bright laughter mingling with theirs. This idyllic life, once the stuff of impossible dreams, was now her reality. She was no longer the desperate, hollowed-out woman from the restaurant. She was confident, secure, and deeply, profoundly happy. She was the head of a foundation that helped hundreds of people just like her former self, and she was a mother to 3 wonderful children, not just one. Alistair caught her eye from the garden and gave her a warm, loving smile that made her heart flutter. Even now, he had healed, too. The haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a steady, joyful light. They had saved each other. He had given her security and a platform for her compassion. But she, with her selfless heart, had given him back his life. She had shown him how to live and love again. He jogged back towards the house, the children trailing behind him, their faces flushed and happy. He slid onto the sofa beside her, wrapping a strong arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, kissing the top of her head. She leaned into his embrace, a feeling of pure, unadulterated peace settling over her. "I was just thinking," she said, her voice filled with a quiet awe, "about how a simple cup of hot chocolate can change the world." He held her tighter. Their perfect, idyllic life was a testament to the power of a single, selfless act of kindness. This story is a fable, a reminder that in a world that often feels cold and transactional, the currency of kindness holds an immeasurable value. It illustrates how one small, selfless act, offered without any expectation of reward, can set in motion a chain of events so powerful it can heal the most shattered of hearts and rewrite the most desperate of destinies. Alara's simple gesture of warmth to 2 lost children was a beacon of light that cut through Alistair's darkness, reminding him of the goodness that still existed in the world and, more importantly, within himself. It is a testament to the idea that our true worth is not measured by our possessions or our status, but by the compassion we show to others, especially when we have little to give but our own good heart. If this story touched your heart and reaffirmed your faith in the power of human connection, please let it be more than just a passing moment of inspiration. Let it be a gentle nudge to look for the opportunities in your own life to offer a small kindness, to be the unexpected miracle in someone else's difficult day. The world can be changed one small, selfless act at a time. Your gesture, no matter how insignificant it may seem to you, could be the very thing that saves someone who is quietly, desperately waiting for a sign that they have not been forgotten. For more soul-stirring tales of love, redemption, and the extraordinary power of the human heart, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. We believe that stories can heal, inspire, and connect us all, and we are dedicated to bringing you the most heartwarming and inspiring narratives that celebrate the very best of humanity. We'll see you in the next one.